All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the greatest race day of the year. We got F1, Indy, and NASCAR all day long. So I'll be glued to the couch all day with the TV on, just watching racing all day. So super excited for today. Not talking about the F1 race, not talking about the IndyCar race. We are focusing on the Coke 600. So looking at the preview and strategy, initial thoughts. Like I said, it is the Coke 600. It's one of our crown jewel events that we have. It's the longest race on the schedule. It's 600 miles. So it's going to be quite a long race, probably 4+ hours of cars, just going around and around. So definitely going to be a race of attrition and a race of survival. 400 laps around Charlotte Motor Speedway is a lot. To put that in perspective, I think the truck race was 134 laps, and I think the Xfinity race was 200 laps. So, twice as long basically as the Xfinity race. If you don't know, it's a 1.5 mile, intermediate track. So, what does that mean as far as like reference points? What are we really looking at? Well, as always with 2022, we know how different this car is. So we really just want to focus on practice and qualifying as our first metric. And it was nice because they practiced and qualified yesterday, right around kind of the same start time as the race. So you don't really have that big discrepancy between, weather. The other thing we want to look at is really how have these drivers performed at the 1.5 mile intermediate track so far this year? Not really looking at previous track history or, other tracks on the schedule that don't really correlate. I think you want to focus on practice and qualifying. And then if you're potentially in between, maybe one, two, maybe even three drivers, you're trying to pick between one of them or two of them, then kind of go back and look at the intermediate tracks, how they have run, what was green flag speed, not necessarily always what finish did they get, but how were they performing in that race? And you can get some of that metrics or some of that information. Racing Reference, for example, is a free website. There's some other DFS, NASCAR DFS content creators that have their own spreadsheets, their own information that you can, more or less subscribe to get even more in-depth information to potentially help you pick between two of those drivers. One thing that you're probably going to see tonight, unfortunately, is tire issues. Been running into this all year long. As far as, what that means from like a DFS perspective, like it's pretty unpredictable. I think you just kind of have to eliminate that from your mind and just know that, hey, tire issue can happen to anybody. Most likely we're going to see drivers blown left rears, blown, right fronts, right rears, whatever it potentially might be. It's going to happen. Hopefully you can just get lucky and avoid it happening to your driver. If it does happen to your driver, hopefully they don't get up into the wall or get stuck and need, a tow truck to carry them back to pit road or, damage to the diffuser or whatever it potentially might be. So, it is what it is. Just kind of keep that in mind, depending on, maybe how much money you want to put on the race. I don't know, but tire issues are going to happen, especially when you have 400 laps. So I'm really not trying to, do anything differently than I normally would. I just know that, hey, the tire issues could happen to anybody. So maybe keep that in mind too when you're looking at some of the chalk plays. Like, hey, maybe they have just as good of a chance of having a tire issue as somebody else. Like I said, it's 400 laps, so there's a ton of dominator points available. There's 100 points available for laps led, 180 points available for fast laps. So that's 280 points, right there. So because of that, you almost want kind of like that short track mentality, whether we're going to a Bristol or Martinsville or Richmond, type of mentality where you really want to focus on trying to get as many, dominators, as many lap leaders, as many guys you can earn fast laps into your line as possible, instead of just focusing on all place differential drivers. Now, this slate gets a little bit different based off of some of the guys having issues in practice qualifying and who start, kind of in the rear. We saw that yesterday with the Xfinity series. And hey, Jeffrey Earnhardt was super high owned, looked like a slam dunk, kind of chalk play, and he had issues and he was really high owned. So that's kind of what I wanted to mention in the last point is yeah, there's going to be a lot of ownership. There's a lot of chalk plays. So just figure out what chalk plays you want to be overweight on and what chalk plays you want to be underweight on, and then find your pivots accordingly. You don't have to get drastically different. Sometimes it can only be, one or two tweaks to make, that much of a difference. For me, I'd rather, focus on eating some of the chalk place differential plays and then trying to differentiate my line, based on potentially who the dominators might be. So that'll do it for kind of the preview and initial thoughts. Thanks again. We're slowly creeping up to that 500 subs mark. We've been gaining some more subs over the Xfinity and truck videos this weekend. So thank you guys for doing that. Yeah, so let's hop into the driver by driver breakdown. So, Larson is going to be the first guy who had issues in practice. He starts basically DFL. The crazy thing with Larson is, yes, he's a place differential play, obviously, but if you look at his practice times, he looks like a potential dominator play as well. So he's going to be really high owned. If you're playing cash games, just start your line with Larson. But if you are playing Larson, you need to play that narrative out in your head of like, okay, I think Larson, maybe can get up front, but maybe it won't be until stage 2 or stage 3. Well, that's great if you are playing him, but you also need other drivers in your line to pick up those laps led, those fast laps as Larson is working his way through the field. Who potentially could some of those drivers be? We'll talk about it. Larson's super expensive. He hasn't necessarily worked out all year long. But again, usually we've been playing him focusing on just a dominator play as he starts towards the front. This is really the first time that we've seen him, start, basically DFL. So it's going to carry a lot of ownership. So, I think you should either come in over owned or, under owned. Just depending on, if you want to eat that chalk or not. But I like Larson as place differential play and a driver who could potentially, be a dominator as well. As far as an early dominator goes, I like Kyle Busch a lot. The Toyotas have been extremely fast on the 1.5 mile, tracks this year. He's probably a little bit more of a GPP type of option because I think a lot of ownership's going to go to, Denny Hamlin, who starts on the pole. But it's a long race, and Kyle could get up front at any point in this race. It doesn't have to be just in stage 1. We know how fast this team is on pit road. That's going to be an awesome opportunity to advance your position as well. Especially if there are a lot of tire issues, there are a lot of cautions, there is a lot of chances, opportunities for drivers to come down pit road and advance their position. Kyle's a driver who we feel can gain spots not only on the track, but kind of on pit road as well. So I like Kyle Busch. He's pretty expensive, but he's one of our favorite dominator plays today. Chase Elliott, he's interesting. He offers you a little bit of place differential and some dominator upside as well. He's been super consistent. He doesn't always necessarily have those dominating, performances. He isn't always necessarily picking up the most amount of fast laps or getting you the most amount of laps led, but he's consistently getting you those finishes. Starting 13th, he gives you a little bit of place differential. He's kind of a similar play to Truex. I actually kind of prefer Truex because Truex is a little bit cheaper, and Truex showed better times in practice and we've seen how fast his other Toyota teammates were. So I don't mind Elliott. I might actually bump him down to medium to get a little bit different. Just so you have a clear understanding of where we're going. But I still like him a lot as a DFS play. I just think probably to get to some other drivers a little bit more. Denny's interesting too. I think I potentially might come in a little underweight on Denny today. He does start first, so I think that pole is going to give him a little bit of an ownership bump. If you just look at his finishes or his average, points on Draftkings, it's going to be significantly lower than a lot of the drivers priced around him because, until recently, this team has just not been getting the finishes, but that isn't indicative of, how this team has been running on track, the speed that this car is showing. So Hamlin looks like the best early lap leader. I just think he's going to carry a lot of ownership. So if you're playing cash games, I think Hamlin is a good place to start as potentially an early lap leader to pair maybe with Kyle Larson. But if you're playing GPPs, playing tournaments, you want to try to get a little bit different. I don't mind, going to Kyle Busch instead, or potentially playing Hamlin or Busch as your early lap leader, and then trying to get different with playing a Truex or Chase Elliott as someone who you think can get up to the front maybe later in the race. And then that kind of leaves Byron. So I think Byron's going to kind of get overlooked. He's probably my least favorite option, of all the drivers that we just talked about. But again, we've seen it so often with this car. Anyone can have a tire issue. Anybody could wreck out. Anyone can have a mechanical issue. And Byron has the track position, and he's been running well this year. And I don't think he's going to get a lot of ownership. So if you're building multiple lines, I don't mind getting to Byron as a potential GPP option. Then you get down to Ross Chastain. I like Ross Chastain a lot in tournaments and cash games. Gives you a lot of place differential upside. Trackhouse has been one of the best cars, on the track and on pit road this year as well. I still think he should be more expensive than he is. It gives you some place differential upside and some lap leading upside as well. So I like Chastain quite a bit. Reddick is just someone I don't necessarily see ourselves getting to. It's hard to feel confident plugging Reddick in when you can get, Chastain, Bowman, Blaney, Logano, even drivers below him. I think we just feel more confident in their upside. And starting eighth, he's kind of in that like no man's land of, potentially getting stuck there, or if he has an issue, it's really going to hurt your line. But I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing Reddick today. So it could be a potential low owned kind of sneaky play. But I'd much rather just plug in, Bowman or Blaney. Bowman had really great practice times. He's really cheap. Looks like a solid, tournament option. He's really easy to fit into lines as a potential, dominator, lap leader, fast lap getter. So I like the idea of, maybe trying to punt with one or two plays and then just trying to either build your line with Larson and like two to three other potential dominators. If you are playing Larson, you think that he's a potential dominator as well, or just shoving in potential for lap leaders and maybe trying to fade some of those place differential plays. Like I said, 400 laps, ton of dominator points up for grabs. You're going to need those guys in your line. Blaney is similar to Bowman. I just like Bowman a little bit better because Bowman had much better practice times, and overall Hendrick has just been outperforming Penske. But I don't hate Blaney by any means. I'm going to have a lot more ownership to Bowman than I will Blaney. Logano is going to be a little bit more of, kind of a cash games option. I think he's a similar play to Ross Chastain in the fact that they both offer a lot of place differential upside. I just think Ross Chastain has a much greater chance of dominating, of picking up fast laps, of getting up to the lead. But Logano is pretty cheap. Don't mind going there if you're looking for a place differential play in cash games or, potentially in tournaments. I don't necessarily see him being a potential lap leader like some of the plays who, actually right under him. And those two plays would be Kurt Busch and Christopher Bell. We know Denny Hamlin's going to be the highest owned, of kind of the front row, top four drivers most likely. Then maybe followed by Kyle Busch. But if you're trying to get different, if you're trying to, be that contrarian, play of maybe if Denny has an issue, or kind of like we saw with Sam Mayer, in the Xfinity race, hey, maybe they lead a couple laps and then they fall back. Well, who's a potential driver who could take advantage of that if that happens? Well, hey, Kurt Busch starts on the front row. He has as good of a chance of as Denny does of getting that early lead. Same with Christopher Bell. They're going to have that clean air. They're going to have the track position, and they're significantly cheaper than Denny. So I would probably only play one of, Denny, Kurt, and or Chris in a line. With the narrative in mind again of, hey, I think one of these drivers is going to be my early lap leader. And then I could see maybe Kyle Busch taking over later in the race. Then maybe Truex taking over, or Elliott or Larson or Chastain or whoever it potentially might be. But if you go with Kurt or Bell, it's a good way to get different, and it saves you a bunch of salary as well. So it might also differentiate your line elsewhere as you're building out the rest of your lineups. Don't really see myself getting to Dylan or Harvick today. Dylan just didn't really show anything in practice, didn't really have a great qualifying effort, just doesn't necessarily jump off as a great DFS play. Harvick has been consistently getting the finishes, but Stuart Haas as a whole just didn't really show great practice times, this weekend. So that's a little concerning, but he is pretty cheap, easy to fit into lines. I still feel confident he can finish around, 10th to 12th. But I'd much rather, drop down to Daniel Suarez. Suarez is coming out of that Trackhouse stable. We know how fast the, Ross Chastain has been this year. Suarez has been showing a lot better speed as of late. And he actually has the practice times to back it up as well. So maybe he's a driver who could, finish top 5, top 8. And I like the value that he offers at $7,800. An interesting pivot off the Ricky Stenhouse chalk is going to be Eric Jones. He only starts 5 spots ahead of Stenhouse. I like, he showed pretty good times in practice, similar, if not even faster times than Stenhouse had shown. So I don't like I said, if you're just, sometimes it only takes one pivot or, potentially 2 pivots, and it doesn't have to even be, a drastic change. I think Jones is going to come in under owned compared to Stenhouse. So I like going there to get different from Stenhouse, but we're still interested in Stenhouse. He's, he will carry a lot of ownership. Didn't really necessarily have the best practice times, which is a little bit of a concern, but this team has definitely been running a lot better as of late and getting, consistent, solid finishes, especially at these 1.5 mile intermediate tracks. So really like, Suarez, a little bit more of a tournament, GPP option. Eric Jones, I think you could, make an argument for both GPP and cash, and Stenhouse would be, a little bit more of that cash games play. Not getting the Briscoe today. Cindric and Bubba Wallace are interesting. I think they're aggressive, GPP plays as maybe a, really low owned, cheap, probably slim chances of it, but I think they actually do have lap leading upside or the ability to pick up fast laps. I like Cindric a little bit more than Bubba because Cindric actually had the 4th best practice times, at least in the overall time, and I think the 5 lap average, which isn't necessarily the largest sample size, but it's at least encouraging to see that, hey, his qualifying efforts are backing up what this car did in practice. And at $7,100, potentially getting a lap leader in your line for that cheap is really good. You could make the same argument for Wallace, and arguably the Toyotas in 23XI, especially as of late, have been running a lot better than Team Penske. The only problem with Bubba is, his pit crew has just been killing him all year long. And I feel like if they do have issues or, man over the wall too fast, or they lose spots or lose tire, and he has to, keep going back further in the field, it's going to take him longer and longer to pass those cars. And that's going to hurt, his dominating upside. Again, I don't think Cindric and Wallace are like slam dunk, dominator plays, but they're both really cheap and have, I think, the ability to at least maybe pick up fast laps or maintain their track position. And especially if some of these drivers up front, have issues, run into tire issues, who are some drivers that could potentially take advantage of that? Well, let's look at the drivers who have the track position. That's going to be Cindric and Wallace. A little bit of a kind of safer play would probably be Chris Buescher. Buescher doesn't have the same amount of upside that Cindric or Wallace has, but I think he's a decent option kind of starting right in the middle of the field. He's a driver I could see, at the end of the race, maybe taking advantage of a late race restart, maybe finishing anywhere from kind of 12th to 15th. Keselowski is going to be super high owned. He had issues in qualifying, so he starts in the rear today. But when you start looking at the other drivers who are priced around him, there's not really too many plays you want to go to. Like I said, if you're going to Cindric or Wallace, it's because they're more GPP types of options. Keselowski is just going to be, plug him in for cash games basically. Offers a lot of upside. He's not really going to hurt your lines by any means, but if he has the same type of issue that we saw like Jeffrey Earnhardt, have in the Xfinity series, and he's carrying all that ownership, it might not be a bad idea to potentially come in underweight on Keselowski, or another, or Larson, or maybe LaJoy, maybe picking one of those drivers, or maybe even two of those drivers who start deep in the field and trying to get different. But if you're playing cash games, I still think you need all three of them. I don't see myself getting the Almirola, Haley, Custer, Burton, Gregson, maybe, if you need a driver in this range. Not really getting to McDowell. I think Cascarolo is going to struggle, to just keep that car on track. It's a 600-mile race. This isn't a team that necessarily runs each and every week. So having a mechanical issue just seems likely there, although they do start deep in the field. But I'd much rather just, for when it comes to punt plays, really like, Ty Dillon, Ryan Preece, Todd Gilliland, and Corey LaJoy. I don't think you have to get too different than this. And potentially even double punting, getting two of these drivers in your line to maximize the amount of, lap leaders you have, or, slam dunk place differential plays. Ty Dillon's probably going to be my least, favorite option that I'm least considering and playing today. He's a good way to get different off, potentially the LaJoy and Gilliland chalk, and potentially the Ryan Preece chalk as well. But I'm very high on Ryan Preece. I don't know how many people are going to understand that he's in the Rick Ware Racing, 15 car, but we know this is a Stuart Haas prepared, vehicle. They even submitted, pictures of the car in the Stuart Haas, race shop, same type of background that Cole Custer's, car had. And this team, he had issues at Dover. Unfortunately, I know they thought they were down a cylinder at one point in that race, and then just kind of got trapped laps down. But Preece had really good speed, and basically getting a Stuart Haas racing car at $5,200. I really like that a lot. Gillen's a little bit of a interesting pivot play if you're fading LaJoy, but it's going to be hard not to just plug in LaJoy based off of his price and where he starts. He literally can't lose you, any points. He's really cheap, easy to get in the lines. You just know that, he's going to carry a lot of ownership, but unless LaJoy really has issues, it's going to be hard for LaJoy, I think, not to, potentially make the optimal lineup, just based off of, especially if we have a lot of drivers who have issues, it's really easy for him to finish top 30, top 25. But you could make that same argument for really any of the punt plays down here. So don't always just assume that, oh, okay, I need to have LaJoy in my line. Don't be afraid to get it a little bit different. But yeah, I think that's basically going to do it, for the Cup Series slate. I know it's a little bit of a longer, more in-depth video, but races tonight, around 6:00 p.m. Eastern time, something like that. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. You can hit us up on Twitter if you want access to the spreadsheet yourself. It's at FastCarsFM. But yeah, other than that, best of luck today, everybody. Enjoy the F1 race, the IndyCar race, and good luck in the Coke 600 tonight.